Welcome back to the reading of the Goblin Curse of Hamlin. I'm author Dan Allen. I'll be reading from my private collection for kids, Chapter 2. I'm here with Davy the Dragon, who's listening in because he loves a great story. Last time we learned that Claire is turning into a goblin and that the priest wants to throw her into the river. Her brother Tobias is trying to figure out what to do. Chapter 2, Angel in the Night. Tobias lay wondering about his missing sister. Perhaps she's afraid and is hiding. Yes, that's what Claire would do. But where would she go? She's too young to fend for herself in the forest, and what will become of her in the winter when the snow piles up and buries all the plants? How will she stay warm without a fire? How will she hunt beasts? She's too little to even draw a bowstring. Thoughts of the last winter and all its hardships weighed heavily on Tobias. He wasn't a child anymore, and his mind was occupied with all sorts of worries for the family, such as how to get employment on a farm and where best to hunt, and so on. Although at times his mind was occupied with the silly thoughts that creep into older boys' heads, such as how nice it would be for the girls to love them and give them kisses. But this time was so dire that he could only think upon how Claire might survive in hiding, or away from the people who would call her monster, or as the priest had said, a child of the devil. Now Tobias knew that Claire was not a child of the devil, but that she was a special child of God. His mother had been right. It was not the children's fault that they became ill, since Claire had become ill, and yet she was the best of the children. Tobias also knew Claire no longer went out in the sun, that she could not bear it. This was why she stayed in to pray in the church after choir practice until the sun was just beginning to set. And this was why she rose up so early to do all of her chores, but fidgeted at night, which made it hard for him to sleep, since all the children slept together upon the floor and shared the same blanket. What's more, during the day he could sometimes find her asleep in the empty cupboard. The cupboard! Tobias sat up and got upon his feet, which were bare. He stepped across the hard-packed dirt floor, which was not comfortable to sleep on, but was very quiet for sneaking. His mother and father, meanwhile, were sound asleep behind their curtain and did not hear a peep. Tobias felt his way to the cupboard. He couldn't see at all, for it was a moonless night, and the street lamps had all been put out. He found that the cupboard door was open by putting his hand there, where the handle should have been, and feeling nothing in its place. Then he whispered in his tiniest voice, "Claire, are you in there?" She nodded, but of course Tobias could not see her head nodding, so he crouched down and put his head into the cupboard. Now he could see Claire because her eyes were not dark as they looked during the day, but seemed to be shining with a very dim red glow around the edges, which would have been frightful to come across in a dark forest, but to Tobias seemed wonderful. "Claire, what are you doing? Come to bed." In the glow of the light from her eyes, Tobias saw her point out of the cupboard and across the room. She spoke to him in a very squeaky voice that sounded as if the words were being spoken not by a girl, but by tiny pieces of metal scraping against each other. "I was talking to that angel." Tobias whirled around but saw nothing except there. Upon the windowsill were two dim red lights, like those shining in Claire's eyes. Tobias leaned forward to catch a better look, but the lights vanished as soon as he moved. "Has the angel gone away?" Tobias whispered. "Is that an angel? Are you turning into an angel?" "It's not an angel from heaven," Claire explained, cupping her hands around Tobias's ear. "It is a goblin, a kind goblin who's offered to take me away to a cave in the hills, and I can stay there as long as I like, and nobody will try to toss me in the river. This is because I'm becoming a goblin, for I can see now just as well as if the sun were in this very room. I can see the mud on your hands and count your toes. You have all 10. This was quite excellent, that Claire could see in the darkest dark. Tobias was very proud for her, and whispered, "I think you're not a goblin, but a kind of special angel that can see at night." "Thank you very much," Claire said. It was such a sweet and kind thought that it brought tears to her eyes so that she could no longer see through them so clearly. "So when I talk of you," said Tobias, "I will speak of the angel, and nobody will know that I'm talking about you, and I can come and visit you in the caves." "Oh," said Claire, "I'm afraid you cannot come. The goblins will hate you because people want to kill them." "Then I'll make friends with the king of the goblins," Tobias said bravely. "I'll bring him gifts like fish from the river and any cloth if I can get it. It must be dreadful to sleep upon the rocks of the cave without anything soft." "Farewell, Tobias," Claire said, stepping from the cupboard. "I must kiss mother and father on their cheeks once each before I go with the angel." "Then you're leaving tonight?" Tobias said excitedly. I can follow you to the cave." "Do not follow us, for you would stumble upon sharp rocks and cut yourself." Sadly, Tobias realized this was true. He could only see a few inches in front of his face, and this would not do for scaling embankments and crossing waterfalls and climbing over boulders. "Then how will I find you?" he asked. "Pray, and perhaps God will send an angel to guide you," Claire answered gently. She kissed him also upon the cheek, which she could only manage because he was on his knees. "But Claire," Tobias wondered, "how did you talk with the goblin? I could not hear you speaking, and I was awake the whole night." "We can speak so shrilly that only the birds can hear us, and Jesus, and some of the smaller animals. People cannot hear goblins talking, if the goblins want to talk to themselves. That is why our voices are so squeaky," she squeaked. "Oh," said Tobias, heavily confused. "Goodbye," she whispered. "Perhaps you will not recognize me when we next meet." "But I'm sure you'll be the most beautiful goblin," Tobias said, "and all the goblin boys will want you to love them best." "Thank you," said Claire. This was another very kind thought. Brothers don't always say such nice things to their little sisters, but very good brothers sometimes do. And this time it made all the difference in the world. For can you imagine how hard it must have been for little Claire to push aside the curtain and to very softly kiss her father and then her mother upon their cheeks, and to turn away without a word, climb through the open window, and vanish forever? Claire slid her bare feet over the edge of the windowsill and dropped into the tulips in the front garden. She crept carefully along the side of the street, following in the steps of the goblin, whose name was Leffler, and who was in fact a very talkative goblin. Claire could hear him quite well because although she had just gotten the goblin disease that spring, already her ears were changed. She could hear even the tones that made dogs' ears perk up, but that leave their masters confused because they can't hear any of it. Leffler chatted constantly as they went, and this loudly too, except that no people could hear him. Only some dogs heard and barked, but they were all tied up, which was the law in Hamlin, that dogs should be tied up at night. Otherwise, it would have been impossible for Claire and her guide to escape the village undetected. Claire's feet had also begun to change into goblin feet. Already her soles were covered in smooth gray skin that was impossible to poke through, like leather, so that she could run upon a cobbled street and even step upon briars without flinching. But best of all, her feet and hands, though turned to leather, could smell things. But we should get back to the story, because not only is the story getting away from us, but also Leffler was getting so far ahead of Claire that she could hardly see him through the trees, as they had now reached the place where the farms had become the forest. "Slow down," she called out in goblin tongue. That's the squeaky language. "I can't keep up." Leffler ran upon all fours when he was excited, as his arms had grown long enough and his legs had stayed short enough. He stopped in a clearing and waited for Claire, who still ran upon 2 feet, to catch up. And now I shall describe for you how Leffler appeared. Claire, with her dimly red glowing eyes, could see not only colors but also warmth. Hotter things were brightest and colder things were darker, but darker in a shade of color which our eyes can't see. Leffler was warm, so he appeared bright, but he was also dark because his skin was a cold gray. He stood only a few inches taller than Claire and no taller than the height of a mother's chest. He was perilously thin, like a skeleton almost. His joints were knobby so that his legs at his knees looked like 2 thick twigs stuck into apples. His feet were broad and bony, his arms dangled to his knees, and his hands were thin with fingers as long as carrots, and even thinner, coming to a point at the tips where his nails looked as sharp and hard as gopher claws. About his waist, Leffler wore rabbit skin underwear, with nothing on top, and his ribs showed through his skin as though they were desperate to escape or had run out of food. His arms and legs were strung with stringy muscles, like threads of twine being stretched before twisting into a rope. His head was round as a ball, with a wide mouth, thin triangular nose that tipped downwards at the front, and thin vacuous nostrils that tipped upward at the sides. His eyes were all one color, black, and very large, lit around the edges as Claire's. His head was mostly bald, with a stripe of hair that followed the sides of his head around his long pointed ears. His left ear flopped down a bit at the tip, which made Claire smile when she saw it, because it reminded her of a dog, which goblins of course hate, but it made Leffler look more friendly. What she didn't notice, because such things were not so important to her, was that he had a very fancy curved metal knife tucked into a sheath that was bound by a leather string to his thigh and waist. "It's lucky I found you," he chirped, as Claire came to a stop in the clearing. "By tomorrow, the priest would have gathered up a big mob of angry folks to haul you away. I was fishing by the river just after sunset when I heard two children who were out past dark being very naughty. And one of them was saying, 'The priest has found out about Claire.' And the other said, 'It's too bad, for we all love her, and nobody wishes for her to become a goblin.' So I said to them, 'Tell me where Claire lives, and I will give you my fish.' And they asked who I was, and I said I was a friendly goblin, and made them a deal that I would take you to the caves and make you the princess of the goblins." At this, Claire blushed tremendously. Leffler continued rambling in goblin tongue, speaking very quickly as he tended to do. "So they showed me how to find your house, and I gave them my fish, and then they pressed upon me to show them some goblin metal for the new goblin metal glows, and I showed them how my knife glowed and how swiftly I could gut and fillet fish for them even in the dark, and then I ran at once to your house, which I found to be very small, and I thought, 'That's good. It's like a cave.'" "You were very kind to rescue me," said Claire. "I have no gift to match such kindness." And this made Leffler blush. But goblins do not turn red in the cheeks as we do when we're embarrassed. Rather, all sorts of little bumps appeared on his face, which I shall call becoming bumpled. Leffler shrugged his knobby shoulders. "It is my first rescue, and now I think you're safe with me, that is, until the sun comes up, and then things might get rough." "What do you mean?" Claire asked, still panting for breath. "The Hamliners' dogs have hunting noses, and they may come hunting for us. They'll probably eat us before their masters can restrain them." "Oh my, that's terrible. I didn't know dogs ate goblins." "I'm not sure if they do or not," Leffler admitted, as though he had never considered the possibility that dogs did not eat goblins. "But I run just in case." "Isn't there a safe place to hide?" Claire begged. "There is," Leffler said, looking up through the clearing in the trees where the clouds had begun to part, unveiling a blanket of twinkling stars, and then looked back to Claire. "I can reach the secret entrance to the main cave of the goblins before sunrise if I run. But your legs are still too thick to run as swiftly as a goblin." "I'm very sorry," said Claire. "You're brave," said Leffler. "That's better than sorry, I'm sure. But let's be going now and see how far we make it before the sun is up. Goblin Town is still a long way off." "Goblin Town?" Claire beamed. "You mean there's a city for goblins in the caverns? Tell me of Goblin Town, I pray you." "Of course, my lady," said Leffler, forgetting for a moment that Claire was just a peasant and not a lady at all, as folks sometimes did because of her gentle manners. "It's a secret place under the hills, where goblins from all the villages of this part of Germany are gathered for safety. We have," and now Leffler set into singing, "homes of stone and bowls of bone and babes that moan, you're not alone. You'll find secret ways and often stays a bear or snake or fox more supper. We have tunnels wide and open streets by chaps to meet and thieves to beat. They all live happily, you see, in Goblin Town. There are crystal caves and halls of gold, glitter pools and trinkets sold. My aunt and uncle, they'd agree, and surely all the company will rise and shout and dance about for Goblin Town." Leffler finished with a twirl that twisted his knobby legs nearly double around, and topped it with a profound bow. "That's our anthem. I learned it by heart." "You've sung it beautifully," Claire sighed, clasping her hands together for joy. It was the first time she had ever heard singing with her goblin ears. "It must be wonderful in Goblin Town," she mused, as imaginations of the secret underground city swept through her mind. "Then let us be on my way, my dear gobliness. For if the sun finds us before we find the secret entrance, then I shall have to cover my eyes and rely on my feet to lead us. Do your feet taste the road yet?" "Yes, it tastes very dusty." "Good. Well, goblin roads don't taste dusty, as we can't abide the taste of road dust on our feet, so we will take a goblin road paved with clover and more soft and delicious tasting things than dust. You will be my eyes, and I will be your feet, and at last we shall find the main cave of the goblins, and follow the secret tunnel roads to Goblin Town." Claire wondered to herself, "And then will I be made a princess?" But she dared not ask it, because the idea sounded so silly, and of course they could not make her a goblin princess yet, because she wasn't even completely changed into a goblin, and knew nothing of goblin life. But even if she never became a princess, it would be enough to be among friends, that is, if the goblins would love her as her family had. And so they were off, dashing through the forest, leaping over broken logs, running headlong through the brush in the darkest of night, and all without stubbing a toe. But Tobias lay awake, fingering his carving knife, which he used for fashioning musical pipes and toys for the children. Tobias was wondering what would become of all the children of Hamlin who turned into goblins. The end of Chapter 2. Join us next time for Chapter 3 of the Goblin Curse of Hamlin. I'm author Dan Allen. We'll see you next time.